Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for your huge interest in this topic, the ChemScore 2021, the evaluation of chemical companies. And my name is Sonja Haider. I'm the Senior Business and Investors Advisor for Camsec, and I'm running through here for the beginning, and then you will see here also my other panelists for the coming slides and topics. So next slide, please. A quick introduction to Camsec, if you haven't known us so far. We are an environmental organization based in Sweden and founded by 4 environmental NGOs. We receive our funding from the Swedish government and various charity funds over the globe. So not only Swedish or northern ones, but really quite international funds. And we really would like to do an impact. Therefore, we are offering concrete tools like our SIN list, like other SIN producers list and so on, so that you as investor, the companies are able to implement them in their chemical management and go forward and have a progressive chemical management. And we do highlight the positive examples. We have a business group with Lego, Apple, Sony, and many more else. You can look at our website to know more about us. Okay, next slide, please. But Camsec is solely working on the topic of chemicals. But why? Well, we have a chemical production which is doubling in the last decade and will do in the next decade. So it's a lot of material around, and the majority of it is claimed hazardous by the EU statistics, not us, but the European Statistic Board has said that. So that impact has then that we see much more health effects and environmental effects, and we can understand where the chemicals, the hazardous chemicals, are ending up in the tissue of humans, but also in the environment. And we really have increased problems there. The health problems are from cancer to reduced fertility, and in between a lot more. And also in the environment, we really hampering the safety and stability of our ecosystems. And we create a big biodiversity loss with this chemical pollution. We have a figure here from the WHO, 1.6 million deaths in 2016, which were attributed to just a few selected chemicals. So the problem is much larger. And with this environmental effects, that is not the only challenge we face, but the chemical industry is one of the most energy consuming industry sectors and accounts for 70% of the increase in oil demand. And you have to understand that this is not only the energy used for the production process, but half of it is our feedstock for the products. If you imagine plastic, this is mainly done by with the feedstock of fossil fuels. So we also have a lot of fossil fuel use due to the raw material we need for the products. 84% of the Europeans are worried about the impact of chemicals. And so therefore, the EU Commission has started in the Green Deal also to work on the chemical legislation, which will Frida will tell you more. And on the left side, you see the iceberg where, yes, we do know some of the most hazardous ones very well, but for a lot of others, we only have scarce information, and we really need to understand that much closer. Okay, so next slide, please. yeah, and there is it's missing. Unfortunately, you don't see the what these lines are standing for. Something must have gotten wrong here with the graphic, because we checked it a few times. So what you see, I explain it to you. You see from 2018, January 2018 till today, you see the development of the stock market. The yellow line is the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So this is the broad industry market. And then we have three companies. The blue one is 3M. The red one is DuPont, and the gray one is Chemours. All three companies are having produced perfluorinated substances, and since decades, and now the litigations are kicking in from 2018 onwards, and therefore these stocks are underperforming dramatically. Yeah, with €1 spent in the January 2018, you would in the market have €1.40 now. But for the chemical companies, these three, you only have a value of 70 or 80 cents. So it's half of it that you could have this shows the underperforming of the perfluorinated producing companies. Okay, so this is why investors really should look at that, because chemicals do play a very important role, and therefore we also started with our ChemScore project. Next slide, please. Peter, somehow something is not working with.
Sorry, I know that too.
Yeah. So I'm just continuing, and hope that Peter gets the right or solves the problem with
Can you see it now?
Presentation. I can't see anything now.
Sorry.
No. So ChemScore, we started with ChemScore last year because we felt that the chemical management is still underrepresented in the ESG evaluations, so the environmental, social, and governance issues. Peter, I see now the presentation slides, but yeah, and now it's thrown out again. And we started with ChemScore, and we have a specific focus on the chemical management. So we are not looking at energy waste and all the other stuffs which are already covered to quite an extent by a lot of companies, the sustainable rating agencies, but also the banks and investors. But we had the feeling that chemicals are underrepresented. So we started last year. And now for this year, we have come up with the leaders and laggards. I hope you see it now. I see it clearly. And on the left side, you have the leaders, where you have companies, and you see European ones, but also our top scorer this year is Indorama, a Thai company, which has been overtaking DSM, the leader of the last year. On the right side, you also see European companies, but a lot of Asian companies, where we don't downgrade them often because lack of information in the Asian market. It's not really clear what they do produce there. And for the European companies, very often we lack information on their details on chemical management. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, and again, the picture is missing. We've got company feedback, and there I'm really grateful, and all of you have given us feedback, sometimes very detailed. I'm very, very grateful, because it really helps us a lot to understand the chemical management in detail. Every company has a little bit of a different way of doing that. And we are now digging into it much deeper. With 6 of the companies, we had a dialogue. We had sometimes even various conference calls to clarify the methodology, but also what our expectations are, what our perspectives are. And we see already movements in the sustainability reports and on the website. Next slide, please. Still, the picture's missing, Peter.
I say I'm sorry, I don't know why it's missing, so we have to go on without them.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
So, but what do we evaluate? We have 4 criteria, and we discussed this in length last year with the investors, with the chemical industry itself, with authorities. And it boils down to the hazardness of the portfolio. This is the thing which concerns us most. So criteria number 1 is specific the chemicals. And we added you see the red additions. Pick and pop are substances for the Rotterdam and the Stockholm Convention, which are the most difficult ones, the most hazardous ones. And highly hazardous pesticides, we also added to the ones which are already covered in EU legislation. On the right side, you see that in criteria number 2 and 3, we have included the circularity. We do think that this is a major development in Europe, but also globally. We have to get more circular, so not use so much feedstock, because that will be scarce at some stage. And the chemical industry has a very important role here, because it's at the beginning of the supply chain, in the beginning of the development of the materials. So we looked if there are circular products and processes already available, or in the management and transparency section, if there are clearly outspoken strategies with clearly named targets and deadlines. And what we found, I will tell you in a minute, but there will be also a webinar explicitly on circularity hopefully in 1 month's time. Criteria number 4 is a little bit of a control criteria for us. Controversies, and we have our NGO colleagues looking at all the companies, but we probably won't have a complete picture. This is valid, or this is available for the investors through RepRisk and other providers. We are only using it to understand the differences between the companies, and especially for the companies where we have not a lot of data. We really do not want to miss those which have big problems with the controversies, with accidents, spills, etc. Okay, next slide, please. So these are all the companies we have evaluated. There are now 50. Last year we had 35, and you see it from the regional difference. It's almost 1/3 in America, 1/3 in Europe, and the third in Asia is growing and getting bigger. And the black companies are those ones which have been already evaluated last year. The red ones, they are new. And what are our results? Next, please. Next slide, please. And these are the rankings we come up with at the end. So we have a standardization from A+, which would be the best, to D-. And you see there is no green spot here. That would be an A. The best is the B for Indorama Ventures, and B- for DSM and Air Products. And then it's a lot of C in the middle class, and also a lot of them where we either have not a lot of data, or where we see the chemical management not that progressive. So there's a lot of room to the top. And just to say one word, because we've got this question, is it even possible to get an A? And we had a smaller company called Corbion. They ranked themselves. We scrutinized that and we checked that. And yes, they are in the A region. They have, of course, specific chemical product portfolio. Nevertheless, they also have a very excellent chemical management. So it's possible to go to the top. Next slide, please. And for the comparison, I also wanted to share that we don't see much progression, unfortunately. You see here a lot of red downside angles. This is for all those who have scored less than last year, but I must admit that we have canceled some of the easy points. So to stay the same, you have to do more. That is reflected for almost very, very many companies. There are a few ones which are really doing very good or improving a lot. I really would like to tell here LyondellBasell. They really raised their score by 7 points, which is a lot. And the sustainability report really improved in our eyes dramatically. Also for Torre, this is the same. We now see a lot more details about the chemical management. And so therefore they got also a lot more points. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, it is what it is. The pictures are not showing.
Yeah, but then now these, it's really getting, yes, there now I see it. Yeah, so we carry on with this one. You saw that already from the color coding of the regions. Europe is ahead, but with the average of 15 points. 48 is the top, so there's still a lot of room which is left. For US, Canada, it's in between, and Asia, it's mainly the lack of information, lack of data we have there. Next slide, please. What is positive that a big majority, 3/4, are actively marketing greener and eco-friendlier products on their website in their sustainability reports. Very often not in such a comprehensive way that everyone can understand which products are out there and choose and pick and choose that. We have, as you know, we have done a marketplace for Camsec to show the less toxic ones. But we see the companies really offering those products. Next slide. What we don't see is the information on the production, and the information specifically, we are only interested in the hazardous product portfolio because this is the critical one. This society has a need to understand better. And we only have a database in Europe and in US, and we've got the critique that the US data is outdated. It's updated every 4 years, and there was an update in 2021, but due to Corona, the data hasn't come through. So this will be changed probably then in the next quarter, and I hope that we will get the data. Nevertheless, we are happy to have these public data, because otherwise we would be completely blind. So therefore, I really call on the companies, I urge them to be explicit about their production. And we've seen also companies who are really also acting on this gap of updates. We see, for example, Lanxess, they have now a dedicated page on their homepage where you can see the phase outs, and we will definitely take that into account in the next year. Next slide, please. Yes, and as we said, the hazardous product portfolio is the most important one for us. So we really would like to see phase-out plans for substances of concern, and only 8% of the companies are showing that. And I hope to see much more in the future, because it's really important to limit the effects for health and environment for the future. Next slide, please. And a few more results. You've seen already the rare progression of the industry. I really do have a hope for 2022, because politic-wise, you will hear Frida in a minute. There's a lot happening, and I think also the chemical industry has understood the need for getting more sustainable. We have a lack of data in Asia, and still I'm not sure how to cover that. But again, the companies have a responsibility to show also their activities there. And the circular topic, at the moment, they lack scale and strategy. It's very, very diverse, and probably because there is no standardization in place yet. But I really also hope that this will be more harmonized and streamlined in the future. And if you go to the hazardous chemicals, 3 companies are coming up all the time. If you go to the substance of very high concern or the persistent organic pollutants, the PIC or the hazardous highly hazardous pesticides or persistent chemicals, these 3 companies, BASF, Lanxess, Dow, they always turn up in the top. So there's a lot of things to do. And next slide. This is then also our recommendations. Yes, reduce hazardous portfolio, and please start with the persistent chemicals. You have seen the stock prices of 3M, Chemours, DuPont in the beginning. Persistent chemicals bear this huge liability problem. The problem won't go away. They are persistent. So here we really would like to see a decrease of those substances. Of course, innovate safer, less toxic alternatives and market them actively, and definitely increase the transparency, and have a clear, defined and timed strategy on circular economy. And for the next slides, just it's a little bit of an amusement, or sometimes it's even sad. We are looking for words like green and circular, eco-friendly and so on. And for Bayer, we have found the Bayer Green Solutions team, which sounded nice, but it's about pesticides and golf greens. And circular, this is reflected in a kids program. Well, we really do want to see more serious taken up of these environmental topics. Next slide, please. And here is one of the scorecards from our leader in the Indorama Ventures. And what you please go into ChemScore, we have to register. There's no fee involved this year, so it's free to use. And you get a summary of our evaluation. You get a breakdown into all of the categories. We made a lot of effort to write 3 points for improvements. So for the companies, but also for the investors to use. And we can always provide you with more information if you want to. You also can download the methodology in detail. This is the download button, download report button. There you also get the single question and the single answers and points for everything. And you can download the controversies as well. With that, I would like to close the ChemScore and just one comment regarding taxonomy, which is a legislation. We're coming into the policy part in a minute. That taxonomy is a financial regulation, and I'm involved in that. And there will be a standardization for sustainable economic activities, and hazardous chemicals will play no role. So if you want to have sustainable money, green money, you should really take it seriously and move out of the hazardous stuff. And with that, I really would like to thank you already for your attention and pass on to Frida.
Hi, thanks Sonia for this introduction to ChemScore. So my name is Frida Hack. I'm Deputy Director of Camsec. I am also in charge of the Camsec policy work. And with this, I would try to walk you through what's happening in the EU policy-wise, to give you a brief overview and also touch upon some developments in the US, because I think that you are interested in that. We can take the next slide, Peter. And as Sonia stated in her introduction, in the last couple of years, numerous reports have highlighted the importance of tackling the problem with hazardous chemicals. And many of these reports acknowledge that the EU regulation is a good basis, but not good enough, as only a small fraction of man-made hazardous chemicals are regulated in some way today. And these reports, many of them point towards the urgency to better protect human health and the environment from hazardous chemicals. And they conclude that business as usual is no longer an option, and the issue of hazardous chemicals need to be dealt with. And following all these reports that have come out during the last years, the EU Commission launched the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability in October 2020. And we can take the next slide, Peter. And this strategy is a roadmap for how all relevant EU institutions should approach the topic of hazardous chemicals. It's also very clear on that major changes in EU chemical regulation will come about in the coming years. And for us, the launch of the chemical strategy marked a substantial change within the EU Commission and was due to the new leadership under Ursula von der Leyen, who came into office with her new commission late 2019. And this new commission had new priorities, and following the so-called green wave in the European Parliament election earlier in 2019, and entering office, the commission launched a famous Green Deal, where the chemical strategy was one piece of the larger puzzle for transitioning EU towards sustainability. And I will now try to walk you through some of the important changes the chemical strategy will bring for European industry. We can take the next slide. Firstly, the strategy introduced a new hierarchy in chemicals management. Top priority is now phasing out the most harmful chemicals instead of trying to control them and control the exposure of them, also known as risk management. And with the most, when I say the most harmful chemicals, I'm not talking about all kinds of chemicals. We're talking about chemicals that cause cancer, mutagens, reproductive toxicants, persistent chemicals, bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, endocrine disrupting chemicals, etc. I will not go through all of them, but they have severe impacts on human health and environment. So this means that instead of spending time and resources of managing the risk of toxic chemicals, which is largely the case today of all stock listed chemical companies, companies should make it a priority to phase out these chemicals. And this might seem like a sort of minor issue, but in the world of chemicals, this is really a small revolution. And risk, to explain a bit more in detail, is a calculation of exposure and hazard. And it's a complex task to do risk evaluations. And it has clear limitation. It's challenging to accurately estimate possible exposure to a chemical throughout its life cycle, from workers involved in the production, users exposed through products through its lifetime, and all the way to waste and recycling. And in many cases, adding exposure assessment adds really to uncertainty. And accurate risk assessment are also very expensive and time consuming. And moreover, in a circular world where we like materials to be reused and where we can use it more, many times, such calculation are more or less impossible because you don't know what your material and where your chemical will end up in its second or third life in the circular economy. And also risk calculations tend to change over time when more data is available. I will give you a very recent example for the chemical of BPA. BPA is present in many types of plastic containers and food cans, for example, and scientists have known that since the 90s that BPA has potentially very harmful effects on reproduction and brain development, even in very low doses. And in 2015, the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, set a safety level for daily BPA intake or exposure of 4 micrograms per kilo of body weight. And in its draft re-evaluation in late 2021, they set the tolerable daily intake at 0.04 nanograms per kilo of body weight. There's a lot of numbers there, but that is a 100,000-fold drop. And that means that all citizens in the EU, and most probably in the rest of the world, get exposed to harmful amounts of BPA from food and drinks every day. So this is what can happen in risk calculations. And just for curiosity, in BPA, the safe level is set at 50 micrograms per kilo body weight, and it was set in 1988. And of course, this recommendation from the authority, from EFSA, will have major effects on chemical enterprises, both the ones producing BPA, but also the ones using the chemicals in their products. Many products will need to be reformulated. An alternative solution will have a huge market potential. And as mentioned earlier, the majority of chemical producers focus mainly on risk calculations today, to how to reduce exposure of hazardous chemicals. But they now need to shift the focus to the intrinsic hazard properties of the chemicals and developing alternatives to the most harmful ones. And our suggestion is, of course, that investors also should take this more hazard-based approach into consideration. By avoiding the most harmful chemicals, you also avoid a lot of risk in your investments. We can take the next slide, Peter. And following the aim in the chemical strategy, that focus should be more on the intrinsic hazard properties. The strategy is also very clear on that the most harmful substances will not be allowed in consumer products and products for professional use. And this might seem like something you as a consumer would take for granted, but unfortunately that is not the case. This will lead to numerous changes for chemical producers and users. So I just cut the text from the chemical strategy here, which says that the aim is to ensure that consumer products, including food contact materials, toy, childcare articles, cosmetic, detergents, furniture, textiles, should not contain chemicals that cause cancer, etc. And this will be done, these changes will be done through changes in REACH and classification and labeling directive, CLP. But since these changes are foreseen to take quite a long time, the strategy also promised to restrict all uses of chemicals with these properties through REACH as it stands today. And this means that changes will come about for these chemicals used in consumer products fairly quickly. We can take the next slide. And the strategy is also clear in its ambition to phase out PFAS. PFAS is a family of about 5,000 chemicals that all have similar function and hazard properties. PFAS are found in 99% of humans, and they are known to cause cancer, birth defects, a long list of bad things. And they are called forever chemicals because they never go away. They don't break down, and they are found in the environment and in our bodies. And now 5 EU member states are working on a restriction for the whole group, so the 5,000 substances. And this will be ready this summer, and it will then be handed to ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency. They will scrutinize this dossier and then send to the Commission. And we expect the Commission to take a decision and ban PFAS, both in use and production, in 2024, 2025, something like that, and that the ban will enter into force fairly soon after that. And also briefly mentioning what's happening in the US on PFAS. Also in the US, it's high on the political agenda. In October last year, the Biden-Harris administration launched a plan to combat PFAS pollution. Their main focus is drinking water, and 8 government agencies announced steps to address the PFAS issue. And it seems to mark a significant move in the right direction after years of not very high political interest in this area. And as a part of the Biden-Harris administration plan to combat PFAS pollution, the US EPA published a PFAS strategic roadmap specifying what will be done. And a large number of other PFAS-related bills have also been introduced in Congress during last year. And a large number of states are already restricting PFAS in different ways, and more restrictions are to be expected. So on PFAS, the message from both EU and US policymakers are very clear: PFAS should be phased out. And again, most of these 5,000 PFAS substances are perfectly legal to manufacture today. But imagine what will happen with those companies that are not prepared for that when it's not legal anymore. We can take the next slide, Peter. So coming to an end on my part here. So the chemical strategy has a lot of tasks in it. I've just mentioned a few, but you can read more on the Commission website, but also we have written more about the chemical strategy. But it will lead to that a number of chemical regulations will be revised in the EU in the coming years. And some of them are mentioned in the chemical strategy. Some are commitments for other policy areas, but they all need to take the chemical strategy ambition and the aims into account in the revision. So I just listed a number of regulations here that are up for revision in the coming years. For some, there will be a major revision, a big revision. For some, it will be a smaller one. For each, for example, it will be a big revision. And it's there's a proposal from the Commission that we expect any day. We can take the next slide. That's my last one. I also wanted to mention that the EU chemical strategy also is clear that so-called frontrunners will be supported, that companies moving towards safe and sustainable chemicals should gain from doing so. And in our point of view, this is a change of mindset, that the focus should really be on the ones going in the right direction, and they should be supported. And what the strategy says is that political and financial support will be given to promote chemicals that are safe and sustainable by design, and regulatory tools will be to drive and reward frontrunners in the chemical industry to be exploited. And the strategy aims to transform the industry by introducing incentives to attract investment in safe and sustainable products and production methods. And the Commission is also aiming to define what is safe and sustainable by design. So the strategy, I think I made myself clear, has a very clear message from EU policymakers. Hazardous chemicals are not the future, safe and sustainable alternatives are. And if you read the report cards in ChemScore closely, you will see which companies that have a very problematic portfolio of chemicals that are prone to future regulation, and which companies that are putting resources into research and development of sustainable alternatives. And with that, I like to leave to Eugenie.
Hi there. I'm just getting my camera to work. It doesn't seem to want to. Sorry, my camera won't go on. Was before. Hi, everybody. I'm Eugenie Matthew. I am the Earth Pillar lead, who you have the benefit of not having to stare at. You can just look at my slides. I'm the Earth Pillar lead at Aviva Investors, which is, if you look at the next slide, please. Aviva Investors is part of Aviva, which is the UK's largest insurance company. It's largely an insurance business, but there's an asset management arm that manages £267 billion worth of assets. Our philosophy is that responsibility is built in as a fundamental component of the outcomes we seek to provide through our products. It's not new for us. This has been part of our proposition for nearly 5 decades. Next slide, please. So how have we been working with Camsec? In 2020, we started working with Camsec because we had found their SIN list very useful in the past, which gives information on which companies are using which hazardous chemicals. And we also liked the approach that Camsec had worked in partnership with global companies on their chemical strategy. When Camsec was developing ChemScore, we gave some feedback on this development of the methodology, and we thought the new survey of the largest global chemicals companies was really useful because it identifies which are leaders or laggards, and this is something that investors always like looking at. As we've seen already, some of the leaders this year included Indorama, DSM, Johnson Matthey. Last year, we engaged with 5 of the companies that we own that had disappointing scores. And following a similarly disappointing response from these companies, this year we worked with Storebrand to gather a group of fellow investors who are also concerned about the lack of progress and transparency in this area. We're really pleased that we gathered a group together of 23 investors representing $4.4 trillion who signed a letter that we sent to the 50 chemicals companies surveyed by ChemScore, calling for greater transparency. That was our main ask. We wanted companies to publish which hazardous chemicals they produce globally, to set targets to phase out persistent and PIC substances, and to shift towards a circular rather than linear model. Next slide, please. Why, looking at the issue of chemicals, why are we interested as an investor? It's because we believe this particular issue can influence a company's bottom line in 3 direct ways: through litigation, regulation, and reputation. Next slide, please. These are just some examples of recent litigation that the numbers involved are quite massive, and are definitely significant for companies, and when fund managers are looking at them and their bottom line. In 2018, DuPont and Chemours had to pay $671 million to settle several thousands of lawsuits connected with the PFAS contamination of local water supplies. This is a chemical used to make non-stick Teflon. And in 2019, 3M similarly had paid $850 million to settle similar PFAS contamination. There are 4 further lawsuits that have been filed more recently, and this is just a quote from a litigation magazine saying that litigation against PFAS manufacturers will undoubtedly endure and continue into the future. And if you look at the next slide, we can see that there's been some comparison with asbestos litigation. This is a US National Law Review, which is quite a well-regarded publication, and it's saying it's too early to determine whether it will take the same path as asbestos litigation, but it's not unreasonable to assume that there will be some similarities, and what we predict is the coming wave of PFAS product liability litigation. So this obviously is a concern to investors. Next slide, please. Why do we support ChemScore? Why are the ChemScore results so useful for us? Primarily because of the significant lack of transparency currently on this issue. This lack of transparency is fundamentally non-aligned with the impact this issue can have on a company's bottom line. Secondly, it's a complex issue that needs technical understanding, a level of knowledge which busy fund managers and ESG analysts don't always have. These 2 factors mean that the company profiles that we rely on, that are provided by our research providers, investors buy data from research providers like MSCI, Bloomberg, Vigeo Eiris. They're not currently providing a detailed enough assessment of this issue, I believe. So just an example of this is one of our data providers ranks Umicore as AAA rated. So that means it's got the highest possible score on ESG. But and that's because it's looking at environmental, social, and governance issues summarized. And even on environmental issues, it's getting very strong scores. But if you look specifically on the issue of hazardous chemicals, which we believe is a critical issue for this company, it's getting a relatively poor rating of D+ in this ChemSec rating, ChemScore, and comes 41st out of 50 companies. And this is a factor that we want to consider because it's a very exciting company for us, because 75% of its revenues are coming from green activities like pollution prevention products, catalysts, catalytic filters, and technologies that can contribute to the reduction of vehicle emissions and developing electric vehicle batteries. So we think that there's, some of the huge enthusiasm and the money that's pouring into green technologies, we need to balance that with a realistic understanding of the environmental impacts of how these products are made and how well the company is managing the risks from using the hazardous chemicals. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned last year, we engaged with 5 companies that had scored poorly, and we weren't too impressed with some of the responses from the companies. And here I've just outlined some of the typical responses that companies gave. Every single company says to us, yes, chemicals are hazardous, but all chemicals are hazardous. Water can kill you, salt can kill you in high enough quantities. If you swim in a pool with chlorine, but if you were exposed to too much chlorine, you would die, and the same with water and salt. So it's just a matter of exposure and risk management, and we are managing the risks properly. Secondly, because we're managing these risks properly, there's not a problem, and therefore the hazardous chemicals, it's crazy to ask us to phase them out. We just need to make sure that they're being managed in a responsible way. And thirdly, that these hazardous chemicals are vital for new green or sustainable applications like batteries for EVs. So I just thought it'd be useful for Camsec to give a bit of feedback on these issues. Sonia, over to you.
Yes.
Shall I start, Sonia?
Yeah, thank you very much, Frida.
Yes, we also hear this argument, salt can kill you too often, and I think that's not very useful for the discussion. And the chemicals that we are talking about here are not salt and water. They are the ones that can cause cancer, that can disrupt your endocrine system, that have real problematic properties. So, I mean, if Sonia showed the big iceberg in the beginning, these are all the chemicals we know, but there are actually a small fraction here that we are talking about to say these are the most harmful ones, and they are defined very clearly, and it's not salt and water. And I think it would be more useful if we could sort of raise the discussion bar a bit higher from this and talk about what's necessary. And I think the chemical strategy, that's what we are hoping, that the chemical strategy being so clear on, for the most harmful substance, they should be phased out. That's a priority. The risk management is not for those chemicals. I think that maybe will make these discussions easier. That's at least what I'm hoping. Then again, with that said, there are still uses, essential uses for society, for functioning of the society, where we should also allow the most harmful chemicals. I didn't go into those details, but there are chemicals that we need, for example, pharmaceuticals, or really functioning of our society. And maybe some applications for sustainable applications like batteries for EVs. Maybe those are essential for the transition. I can't say that, but we also like to make sure that incentives are put in place to find alternatives that are actually better, both to be able to move towards sustainability and to low carbon exposure, and not hazardous chemicals, so that you can have both these issues when developing new products and chemicals.
Over to you again, I think.
Sonia, do you want to add something here? Because otherwise we're thinking about jumping straight to
Yes.
the Q&A session. Do you want to add anything to these responses that we often hear from companies?
No, let's go to the, and is Eugenie
Evgeny is here, but so we're jumping straight to the questions now. So we have a couple of questions here. So I'm gonna read them out and see if any one of you can grab them and answer them, right? So Sonia, what is the criteria we use for identifying the companies we score in ChemScore? Is there a strategy for increasing? This year we scored 50 companies. Are we keeping it at that? And why did we choose these 50 companies?
Yeah, we based it on the revenue of last year. So the biggest ones, more or less, we have chosen. And we will also do it for the next year, also 50 again.
Okay. And then here's another classic question we often hear as well. It relates to pharmaceuticals, that if you ban certain toxic chemicals, you will also have a problem with pharmaceuticals. So it's not realistic, really, this person says, to avoid taking into account the dose effect or the exposure, you know, when it comes to pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I mean, for some applications which are defined as essential use, we can accept the continued use of hazardous chemicals, but we cannot accept it in consumer products or, you know, day-to-day products. And I think that's a large difference. Yeah, and the definition of what is essential, that's also discussed in the EU, and it's a very interesting and vivid discussion about what is essential use. But that's a whole other webinar about that.
Can you say something about, you know, so you talked a lot about the chemical strategy, which is the new kind of strategy put forward by the EU Commission, Frida. How will that play a role in the new taxonomy, Sonia? You're in the working group there with the taxonomy, so you know a lot about that. Can you say anything about how the chemical strategy, how will that play a role in the taxonomy?
Yes, of course, all these attempts should align, and that's what the Commission, but also our expert group is really hoping for. So it's already in there what we are talking in the chemical strategy about the substance of concern. This is a new concept. There are additional property groups, and this will also enter taxonomy. So where we really want to see, and the aim is to channel money into green economic activities, and therefore substances of concern won't receive green money, so to say.
Yeah. So is it correct to say that the chemical strategy will have a larger focus on hazardous chemicals, not managing the risk, and the taxonomy is the same?
Yeah, but the taxonomy is a financial regulation. It's it doesn't ban anything. It's just highlighting the green stuff.
Yeah, but the criteria if it's in or out is the hazard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So ChemScore, do we plan to link it to anything, you know, other existing standards like, you know, Moody's or Standard & Poor's, things like that?
Well, actually, we haven't talked to Moody's and Standard & Poor's so far, but we've talked to others like CDP, Climate, the Carbon Disclosure Project, and others who are also ESG providers, sustainability rating agencies. They are taking into account some of the SID list information, the database, the data we have created. So that's already taking place. And we are also talking about, for example, we have the World Benchmark Alliance. They are combining a lot of these evaluations so that you can have a different evaluation for a company. If you have, I don't know, BASF, and then you have ChemScore, but you also have other topics which they cover. So there we do cooperate.
Question about the SIN list. So the SIN list is our own list where we list chemicals that we think doesn't belong really in products, in consumer products. So, and we also use this for ChemScore, of course, right? So, but there are a lot of substances included there. Someone says here where the hazardous potential has not yet been clarified. So why are we looking at that and not only the substances of very high concern that are classified, you know, officially by the EU?
Yeah, Because we are looking at the properties of the substances, and the identification is a cumbersome process. It's a political process, yeah, where the member states have to write dossiers, and then it has to go through a European discussion. The SIN list, we have more or less, this is a projection of the real candidate list, if so to say. We are looked together with many scientists, and this is really, I think it's very strong. We are now, I don't know, the 13th or 14th year of the SIN list. We never got sued. So for me, this is already, says already that this is true. These chemicals have hazardous properties, and that the companies should really look out for those chemicals, because they can be banned and restricted in the future.
Yeah. I think not getting sued is a great benchmark for success, right? So that's good. So someone asks about hazardous substances, if they're needed in the final consumer product or not. Do we make a difference for that? I mean, in ChemScore we don't really, because then we only look at the chemical producers, right?
Yes.
But obviously we Camsec in other projects talk about consumer products. So could you say something about Frida?
Yes, actually, we do make a difference in taxonomy now as well, where, I mean, we really set the bar high when it comes to consumer products or products for professional use, and that it might in some cases be okay to use hazardous chemicals in production, as long as the chemicals do not stay, or they are not part of the final product. So yes, there is a distinction, definitely.
Yeah, but then again, just to be clear, in the ChemScore project, we're only looking at the chemical producing companies, and we don't really look at the applications where the chemicals are used, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Anything more here? How do you measure the difference between chemical companies that produce medicine and biochemicals and those that are producing regular chemicals in the taxonomy, Sonia?
Oh my God.
Well, you know everything about the taxonomy.
Actually, well, there will be also a webinar on taxonomy, but at a later, probably in March. So we want to continue these webinars. In taxonomy, we don't distinguish between the companies themselves. We are rather highlighting economic activities. So the production of pharmaceuticals will be one. And if this is done by a normal chemical company or a specific pharmaceutical company, that is not of interest. There's no comparison of the companies itself. This is what we do in ChemScore. We compare companies, but in taxonomy, this is about economic activities. And there will be always specific criteria to be met. And for the pharmaceuticals and the chemical production, there has been already a public consultation, so you can be aware of what we've discussed. And actually, also there had been a lot of recommendations which are now taking into account.
Okay. One last question. So you touched briefly in your presentation, Sonia, about circular economy and how we're looking at that in ChemScore. So we have a question here. Do ChemScore take life cycle considerations, or as for example, renewable resources and/or potential negative impacts in the supply chain? So can you tell us a little bit about how ChemScore approaches that, and also the circular economy perspective?
I was a little bit distracted. So can you say the beginning of the question?
Yeah,
again?
if we take life cycle considerations. Yeah.
Well, life cycle considerations is it's quite there is not much data around here. I don't have a company in mind where we see on the website or on the sustainability reports where you can see data on life cycle assessments. So that is almost impossible for us to understand what's going on. And what we've looked for recycled feedstock, we looked for bio-based material, but also had some some hesitations there. For example, bio-based, we only took into account when the material is not in competition of food production or land use. So that's probably not always the case. Yeah, like if you have sugarcane and as a bio-based material feedstock, then you wouldn't get a point. But for waste, for example, from sugarcane, you would get a point. So we differentiate in that. And I also, maybe if this question fits in here, chemical recycling was a topic I read. And we haven't rewarded any point on chemical recycling because we think this is still too immature. It's not clear if it can be scaled up. It's not clear if the energy use is higher than for the virgin material. And then we have problems with the mass balance approach. So there are many, many questions which have to be answered by the companies, standardized and harmonized to understand if this is a final contribution to sustainability or if it's hampering some other environmental topics.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. We're very sorry for the technical issues we had. It's like that sometimes, I guess. But we will have more webinars on ChemScore, and there's a lot of information on the actual ChemScore website. We put a lot of effort into answering a lot of questions that are posed today. So if you go there, I bet you will find a lot of answers to the questions you had already. And visit us on our social media channels here and sign up for our newsletter where we will advertise new webinars. Go to ChemScore, create an account, that's free. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks also, Eugenie, for joining us, even though without the camera. We hope to see you next time. And